been getting a couple of pretty steady stream of questions about what's the test going to look like, and things along those lines. So what I would usually do, I do this for every test, is I carve out a review day so that I don't have students so that students don't have to choose between whatever their outside activity is, like childcare or whatever, and doing a review session. So I do them in class on the last day or so before. But I figured I might as well do it a little earlier this time because it's a Saturday and I'm feeling weirdly antsy about it not being done. So, we're here. So yeah, I'm going to talk to you about the basic test format and philosophy and how to use the study guide. So, let's get started. Okay, well, I kind of already gave you the preamble, but here's the basic outline. This is pulled straight from the review day, and so there won't really be a chunk for questions for me, so I'll talk teaching philosophy, format of the test, including there's an image from a stats test that I made way back when, just to give you some basic structure. It's this class is not a statistics class, so it's a little different. But my goal is for there to be no surprises. So we'll do some example questions. I'll pause awkwardly for questions from me. And then I'll kind of talk about how I use the study guide, because I would make that, I use it to make the test. So yeah, all right. So here's the basic teaching philosophy. My goal is for you to be engaged with the material. So my test is one way to strongly incentivize you to engage with the material. It's not going to be trivia based or filled with gotcha questions. I've had students ask if I expect them to know the specific details of any study that I offhandedly mention. I'm not. Those are things you can kind of look up. If you have a general sense of what the study is. I don't sit around memorizing studies. And I don't. I'll read them and usually have a pretty good recollection, but sometimes I'll forget, some important piece of information, how to find the study again. And so I'll email collaborators and be like, I tried to Google this, but I couldn't. Do you know the study with the guy that looked at divorce and heritability and said that it was genetic and driven by the heritability of neuroticism? And 9 times out of 10, somebody else will know if Google has failed me. So that's kind of my philosophy. I realize that's a straight aside. Also, all my windows are open, so enjoy the sounds of the outside. But all the questions are going to be short answer. They're going to range in type from remembering to all the way up to evaluation. And I'm going to talk about the different question types and their goals. But there's not going to be any multiple choice. It's all short or really short answer questions. And it's because I want to give you some flexibility and not just penalize you for not remembering some nitty-gritty detail that in the real world you would have just Googled or asked someone else. My goal is for you to have the big picture ideas and be able to use those ideas with other ideas. So yeah. Alright, so there are 5 types of questions that I'm pulling from. So you got basic remembering questions. So these increase in difficulty and they kind of build on previous aspects. So when we get to understanding questions, they'll require that you have remembered information, and applying will require that you understand and remember, etc., etc. But so remembering questions are going to be the simplest type. I have given very unsubtle hints throughout the lectures of what the remembering question is going to be. So I'm going to give that unsubtle hint here. Please be able to tell me what the definition of personality is. It's the title of the class. That's going to be on the test. Please don't disappoint me. Because, I want you to go away from this class, knowing what the class was. So, yeah, remembering our, declarative knowledge. Can you recall or remember something in the exact same form it was learned? It's, just basic regurgitation. Next is understanding, and so you need to be able to remember the stuff to understand it, but it's, it'll be posing problems in a different context than the ones you've already seen, and then asking you to explain the idea or concept in that new context. So it's a step beyond just regurgitating, because you don't need to understand to be able to tell me what the definition of personality is. Now, next you've got applying, and those require that you draw from previous experiences, you use some critical thinking, and you're asked to use whatever learned information you have that you remember and understand in another task or situation. So, again, to apply, you need to understand and remember it. Next, we got the two harder ones, and these are going to be where the bulk of the questions come from because they build on the rest. Well, apparently someone's being a bitch right now. So, there's someone talking very loudly on a phone outside. And the guy's complaining about this lady. So that's fun. I'm gonna leave this in. Yay! Also, please don't take that out of context, because I don't know anything about their conversation. Other than it's very loud! Yay! Okay, so the two bigger important ones, the ones that I'm going to draw on mostly, because all the other kind of building blocks up to this point can get us there. So to analysis is, can you break down the information, see how the different elements of whatever it is relate to each other as well as to the whole, and can you distinguish among the different pieces? So you actually have to be able to see what the different working parts are in relationship to each other, and that's fairly important. Don't stress out too much yet. I'll be able, you'll see I have examples for each type that are in slides. So, and last is evaluation. This is the kind of the highest level, and it's ability to justify a position. Can you create a new perspective or point of view? It's really building on all the pieces, essentially being able to remember, understand, analyze, or apply, analyze, and put all those pieces to really form an opinion and justify an argument. Because there's a lot of personality psychology is not settled. I mean, even the stuff that we feel like is settled, how do we quantify associations between things, like correlations? There's actually tons of different correlations, and they have pros and cons. So even the stuff that feels cut and dry, like the statistics, even those you have to be able to critically evaluate. Not in this class. You don't have to tell me all the different types of correlations, because I didn't teach you. But that's the idea. Be able to make a good case. I don't have to agree with the case, and please don't pander to me. Don't give me what I want to hear, because I'm not going to give you bonus points for just agreeing with me for the sake of agreeing. Don't brown nose. I mean, maybe you have to in your other, but you don't need to brown nose for me. Alright, so what does a Mason test look like? here, as we can see. Now this test I tried, this was for my statistical analysis class, so it's closer to the 412, I think, class with research methods, where it's the non-experimental one. And so here I had defined the following terms. These are like remembering questions. These were kind of content specific, give another name for an explanatory variable, because there's lots of different like common ways to describe. Here we've got give 2 reasons why a researcher might choose to do a quasi-experimental design instead of an experiment. And so and some basic true-false stuff. I'm not going to have any true-false but short answers. These are like really short. Most of them, like I'll tell you exactly how much I want, like 4 to 5 sentences, 2 to 3 sentences. And you're welcome to write more. I will read it, but there's a risk when you write more, because if you say incorrect things, that's not going to help your grade. And all the questions will be answerable in that number of questions, in that number of lines. I've done all of them. Okay, so you're very, very subtle. Very subtle. So, short answer. Define the following term. Personality. Yep. If this isn't subtle enough, I don't know what is. So this is like a basic remembering question. I'll tell you how many points stuff will be worth, so you can kind of budget your time. So and I kind of aim for about a minute a point on tests, just to give students a sense of pace. So yeah. Now here's kind of an understanding-y type question. Now not all of these are going to be specifically applicable to us. I grabbed good examples from kind of throughout the multiple review sessions as well as in my other classes. So which of the following ways is the best way for a researcher to judge the face validity of items in a measure? And so I'm giving you options. So this was initially a multiple choice question, but I made it a little broader. And the prompt here is explain your reasoning in approximately 3 to 5 sentences. So for this kind of question, you'd probably want to make the case for your own, as well as maybe point out different ways the other ones aren't best, would be one approach. So here's an applying one. Explain the idea of the one baked theory. Identify 3 reasons why separate paradigms are useful in personality psychology. Now, when I so I have rubrics for each of the items. Now, unfortunately, I can't give them to you because, well, then you would know exactly what to study, because I'm not making tons of rubrics. They take a lot of work. But here, I've got 2 big pieces. 1, explain the idea of the one baked theory, and then identify 3 reasons. So every single piece of the prompt, please address, because every single one of the pieces is in the rubric. And if you don't address that part, I can't give you points. I can't. I want to, but I can't, because it's not fair to other people. And I may make alterations to the rubric, and then I regrade everybody's question. Usually, it's an iterative process. But yeah, so short answer, application. Explain, and then give 3. You'll notice that these are fairly broad. There will be, for the most part, there's multiple ways to answer the question that can give you full credit. Because I recognize that sometimes we get really unlucky with questions, or really lucky. Like my verbal score on the GRE was way higher than every practice test I did. And it was because almost all of the novel vocab was statistics related, like variability and stuff along those lines. So I got very lucky. And so I did way better than I probably probably deserved. Which happens. But on the flip side, you can also get really unlucky. And I try and make it so the questions aren't as luck based. That's also why I give you the rubric or the study guide. So, analysis. So describe two major aspects of the situationist argument. Explain how trait psychologists responded to these aspects. So remember, with analyzing questions, the idea is to break down the information and see how different elements relate to each other in the whole. So you would want to identify two major aspects. There are usually more, but if I give a number, that's how many I want. And it's usually an indication that, because I try and quantify as much as possible to give you as little ambiguous. Like I try and make everything in terms of what I want unambiguous. On occasion, you'll see I've caught this happen. Describe some, and some is vague. So sometimes you'll see in parentheses, I'll give a number. So now for this one, so you got two major aspects. There are more than two, but just pick two, and then explain the responses to those two aspects. And 2 sentences here. If you only address the first half, I can't give you any of the points related to explaining these other aspects. All right. So, evaluation. And remember, for this one, it's your ability to justify position. Can you create a new perspective or point of view from those that I've already given you? So here's one. What are some... Oops. And I did it here. I need to update that. Nope, I don't want laser. I want a pen. What are 2 objections to personality testing? Which of these concerns are valid? So of the 2 objections you raised, which are valid and which are understated or naive and support your point? And why? You can see why I type everything. My handwriting's awful. But, so I try and make them as specific as possible. I try and make it very clear what I want, but also try and grab the broad impact. Now, how do I decide on what kinds of questions to ask? Because you may recall that there's a study guide already for each single question or each test, and they are identical to the learning goals for each module. So how do I use the study guide? I use it as my sampling frame. So and I would make the study guide regardless of whether I shared it with you. I do it to make sure that I'm not over focusing on certain areas or under focusing on certain areas. So what I do is I go through all the learning goals. I kind of chunk them by unit. And in general, given the limitations of this class and test, there'll be 1 question per module. And it will be randomly selected from the study guide. So it'll be randomly related to one of the learning goals in that module. And so I randomly select, so it can be any of the, and then I write a question based on that learning goal. That's how I do it. I know it feels a little well, how do you prioritize importance? By randomizing, my goal is to argue that they're equally important. I try and make, and so when I write the question, I try and hit the big topic, and each time I do this class, I have more questions written than you'll see. And so while I'm still deciding if I want to do random selection per student from the study guide. I think that's going to be more trouble than it's worth. But the idea is that I want my the content of my test to be fairly representative of the content in the lectures and what I wanted you to learn, or what the main goals were anyway, and that there's not much more I can do than, like, unless I gave you the test in advance, which I'm not going to do, just because. But that's the basic idea. Try and be as transparent as possible. That's kind of a general philosophy. I don't want you to spend your time guessing of what I think is important, so I tell you. So that I made some of the questions are going to be almost identical to the bullet points, but not always. So yeah, that's how I use the study guide. How I recommend you use the study guide is if you can kind of address in 3 to 5 sentences, like be able to tell me what the big aspects of each of those bullet points are. So for one of the learning goals, and there's got to be one on like what big theory is. I don't have them pulled up right now. But yeah, so if you can talk for 3 to 5 sentences coherently, maybe if you're a fast talker, writer, maybe more than 3 to 5 sentences. If you can like give a spiel 3 to 5 minutes on any of the topics, like so you could go through them, like slice them up, turn them into flashcards, then you should be in good shape. And anything on that study guide is fair game. So yeah, now that's how I use it. That's one way I recommend you think about using it, and I've given them way further in advance than I ever have before. Feel free to take advantage of that and use it to guide your notes. Now, please don't pull up your notes in a separate file. All the tests are closed book, closed note. But yeah. Also, one other aspect about the test is they are designed to take the entire hour. So if you were to go consult your notes or Google a question, you will not have enough time to finish. Also, I'll note, because the tests are online, and so it will tell me if you pasted in answers from elsewhere. So please just write your answers in the text box as you go. Yeah. Okay, last slide. How do I grade the tests? So what I do is I will go through each question, read through all of them, and, well, first I'll read through my rubric, and then I'll go read through the questions, and by test item, grade all the test item, make sure that see if there were some common misunderstandings, make notes of those so that I can address them in future classes, and do that for each of the questions. And now that I have a TA, what I might do with Lindley is we might each grade 2/3 and see how. So I might grade by question. So I'll grade 2/3 of the questions. She'll grade 2/3 of the questions, and that third of overlap will use that as a way to evaluate if we're grading consistently with each other. So, and from there, integrate reliability, essentially. And we'll see how that goes. But yeah, So, that's it for this kind of impromptu lecture on kind of the testing philosophy. Please use the study guide. It's helpful. I use it to make the test. I mean, you don't have to use it, but like I do that so that I make sure that the test is close to fair, or at least representative. It's probably because the other class I teach is psych testing. So we literally talk about sampling frames and how representative they are. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. I will see y'all later. Bye-bye.